Hell's Angels biker saw a little girl searching through trash on Christmas Eve. The truth broke his heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. It was a cold Christmas Eve, the kind where the chill of winter seemed to pierce through every layer of clothing. The city was alive with festive decorations and Christmas lights, but not everyone was feeling the holiday cheer. Jake Reaper Morrison, a grizzled Hell's Angels biker, was cruising down the empty streets, the sound of his Harley-Davidson roaring through the silence. His leather jacket, worn from years of hard riding, wore the familiar Hell's Angels patch on the back, a symbol of both pride and fear. But tonight, there was no joy in his ride. His mind was preoccupied, filled with thoughts of the past. His brotherhood, the club that had been his family for decades, seemed to be fading into the background. He had been a part of it for so long, but now, all he felt was the emptiness of his own heart. As he passed by a dumpster near the edge of the city, something caught his eye. A small figure, barely visible in the dim streetlight, was rummaging through the trash. At first, he thought it was just another homeless person, but then, the figure moved slightly, and he saw it was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Jake slammed the brakes on his bike, the screeching of the tires cutting through the stillness of the night. He stared in disbelief. It wasn't the kind of thing he expected to see on a holiday like this. The little girl was dirty, her clothes ragged, her face smeared with grime. She was digging through the trash, her tiny hands picking up scraps of food as if they were treasures. The sight hit Jake harder than he'd anticipated. He had seen a lot of suffering in his life, but seeing a child like this, alone and desperate, stirred something deep within him. He hadn't stopped for anyone in years. The club had taught him to keep moving, to avoid getting involved with anyone or anything that might slow him down. But tonight, something felt different. He shut off his bike and slowly approached the girl, his boots crunching the snow beneath him. She looked up, her wide eyes filled with fear. She was clearly startled by the sudden presence of the biker, the last person she expected to see. Jake kneeled down to her level, trying to appear less intimidating. "Hey there, little one," he said gently, his rough voice softening. "What are you doing out here all alone?" The girl didn't respond immediately. She just stared at him, still trembling, her hands clutching a piece of bread she had found in the trash. Jake could see her lips quivering, her body shivering from the cold. She looked as though she had been out here for a while, maybe even days. Jake's heart sank. He had to help her. "It's okay," he said softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." But the girl shook her head, her small voice barely a whisper. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." Jake nodded, understanding. He could see the fear in her eyes, the instinct to protect herself from the world. He had been there before, a long time ago, when trust felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. "I get it," Jake replied. "But I'm not like the others. I just want to help." He extended his hand, offering it to the girl. After a long pause, she hesitated, then slowly reached out and took his hand. She was freezing, her little fingers barely able to wrap around his. Jake gently helped her to her feet, the weight of her small body pulling him in a way he hadn't felt in years. As he stood up, he noticed the girl's eyes glance nervously around, as if she were expecting someone to come after her. Jake knew that feeling all too well. There was more to this than just a girl searching for food. He needed to know the truth, and he was going to find out. Jake gently helped the little girl to her feet, his large hands steady but cautious. She seemed fragile, shivering uncontrollably, her small body trembling from both fear and the bitter cold. He glanced down at her ragged clothes, the torn shoes that barely covered her tiny feet. As he stood up, he noticed her wide eyes still darting nervously around the alley, as if expecting someone to appear out of the shadows. Jake felt a knot form in his stomach. Something wasn't right. He had seen this kind of fear before, but it wasn't just the fear of the unknown. It was the kind of fear a child felt when they had nowhere to turn. "Where's your family, sweetheart?" Jake asked gently, trying to keep his voice calm. The girl hesitated, her eyes flickering to the ground. They're not here," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jake's heart sank as he knelt down to her level. making sure she could feel his presence without being too overwhelming. He knew better than to push her too hard. "Are you alone out here?" The girl nodded slowly, clutching the small piece of bread in her hands like it was the most precious thing in the world. Jake could see the hunger in her eyes. "How long have you been out here?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. The girl bit her lip, avoiding his gaze. "A few days." Her voice trembled as she spoke, and Jake could tell she was holding back the truth. It was clear she was scared, but there was something more, something deeper, that kept her from speaking freely. The weight of the situation hit Jake harder than he expected. The streets were dangerous enough for adults, let alone a little girl left to fend for herself. He didn't know the full story yet, but one thing was certain. He couldn't leave her out here. Not on Christmas Eve. Not in this cold. Not alone. "Come with me," Jake said gently, offering his hand once again. This time, the girl didn't hesitate. She placed her small, trembling hand in his and allowed him to guide her away from the trash pile. As they walked, Jake kept his eyes on her, watching her every movement, waiting for her to speak. But she stayed silent, her small frame barely visible beside him, the harsh wind tugging at the edges of her hair and clothes. As they reached his bike, Jake stopped for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. "I'll take you somewhere warm," he said, trying to reassure her. He wasn't sure what he could do for her, but he knew one thing. He couldn't leave her out here. The girl looked at the Harley-Davidson with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Is that yours?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Jake replied, giving her a small smile. "It's mine." He didn't know why he was smiling, but somehow, he felt a sense of reassurance from her curiosity. The bike was an extension of him, a symbol of his life, his choices, his past. But tonight, it felt like something different. Something that could help her. "Are you a bad man?" The question caught Jake off guard, and he looked down at the girl. Her eyes were wide, filled with an innocent fear that he hadn't seen in years. It took him a moment to find his voice. "No," he said softly. "I'm not a bad man." The girl nodded slowly, as if she didn't quite believe him but was willing to take the chance. Jake helped her onto the back of the bike, adjusting her position so she was steady. As he started the engine, the roar of the Harley filling the night air, he could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. He wasn't just taking her to safety. He was about to uncover the truth behind her fear. Where was her family? Why was she out here alone on Christmas Eve? And more importantly, who was she running from? The ride through the city was quiet, the streets almost empty except for the occasional car passing by. Jake focused on the road ahead, trying to keep his mind from wandering to the unspoken questions. The girl clung to him tightly, her small arms wrapped around his waist. He could feel her shivering against his back, and it only made him want to ride faster, get her somewhere safe. As they reached the outskirts of town, Jake turned onto a side road that led to his garage. It wasn't much, just a small building tucked away in the corner of the city, but it was warm and dry, and that's all that mattered right now. Jake parked the bike outside and helped the girl off. He led her inside, where the warmth hit them like a wave. The garage smelled of motor oil and old leather, the faint scent of gasoline lingering in the air. It was the only place Jake truly felt at home. As he led the girl to a small couch in the corner, he could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he was getting into, but one thing was certain. He wasn't going anywhere until he figured out what was going on. He knelt down in front of her, his eyes searching hers. "You're safe here," he said gently. "But I need you to tell me what's going on. Who are you running from?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and something else, something Jake couldn't quite place. After a long pause, she finally spoke. "I'm not running from anyone," she said softly. "I'm running to someone." Jake stared at the little girl, his heart pounding in his chest as she spoke. Her words hung in the air like a mystery he couldn't yet solve. "I'm not running from anyone," she said softly, almost too softly, her eyes cast down at her worn shoes. "I'm running to someone." Jake took a deep breath, trying to process what she had just said. His mind raced, but he kept his voice steady. "Who are you running to?" he asked, his tone gentle but insistent. The girl hesitated, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her jacket. "My brother," she said quietly. "He promised he would come for me." Jake's mind immediately went to a dark place. He didn't know what to make of her situation, but he was certain that something wasn't right. "Where is he now?" Jake asked. The girl shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. I haven't seen him in a long time. Jake could see the sadness in her eyes, the kind of sadness that came from years of uncertainty and pain. She was just a child, yet she carried a weight on her shoulders that no one should ever have to bear. How long has it been since you saw him? Jake pressed. The girl wiped her nose with the sleeve of her jacket, looking like she was trying to hold back tears. A year, she whispered. He left, and he said he would come back. But I don't know if he's coming anymore. Jake felt his stomach twist. This wasn't just a story about a lost child. There was something deeper here. Something that didn't sit right. Where were you living before? Jake asked, trying to piece together the rest of the story. The girl looked away, her small hands clutching the edge of the couch as if it was the only thing holding her together. I was living with my mom, she said, her voice faltering. But she's not okay. Jake's heart sank as he realized the extent of the little girl's trauma. She wasn't just abandoned. She was running from something, from someone, and she had no one left to trust except herself. What do you mean she's not okay? Jake asked, his voice softening. The girl looked up at him, her eyes full of fear. She's sick, she said, her voice breaking. She can't take care of me anymore. Jake's mind raced, and he could see the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. A sick mother, a missing brother, and a child left to fend for herself in the cold. This wasn't just a matter of a lost girl, it was a family in crisis. Where is your mom now? Jake asked. The girl hesitated, and then spoke in a whisper. She's at home, but I couldn't stay there anymore. Jake stood up and began pacing the small space, his mind working through the situation. The girl had no family to protect her. Her brother was gone, and her mother was too sick to care for her. He couldn't let her go back to that life, not after everything she had already been through. What if we go see your mom? Jake asked, his voice calm but firm. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. No, she whispered. I don't want you to see her like that. Jake stopped pacing and turned to her, his expression softening. I just want to help, he said gently. We can figure this out together. The girl looked down at her hands, and for a moment, Jake wasn't sure if she would speak again. But then, in a small voice, she nodded. Okay, she said quietly. But you have to promise me something. Jake knelt down to her level again, meeting her gaze. Anything, he said. Promise me you won't make her go to the hospital, she said, her voice trembling. She doesn't like it there. She doesn't want them to know. Jake frowned, but he didn't push. He could see the fear in her eyes, the trust she had placed in him. I won't make her do anything she doesn't want to do, Jake promised. The girl gave him a small, tentative smile, as if she were still unsure if she could trust him completely. Jake extended his hand to her. Come on, he said softly. Let's go take care of this. As they stepped outside, the cold air hit them both, but Jake felt a strange warmth in his chest. He was doing something he hadn't done in a long time, taking responsibility. He had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was doing something that mattered. He wasn't just a biker with a reputation. He was someone who could help. And for this little girl, he would. Jake and the little girl walked through the cold streets, the night air biting at their faces as they made their way towards her home. The girl clung to him tightly, her small hand gripping the back of his leather jacket as they walked. Jake could feel the weight of the situation on his shoulders. He had no idea what he was about to walk into, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't let her go back to that place. Not after everything she had told him. The girl had been through more than any child should ever have to experience, and Jake wasn't going to let her face whatever came next alone. As they reached the end of the block, the girl stopped in her tracks. It's just around the corner, she whispered, pointing towards a small, run-down house at the edge of the street. The house looked like it hadn't seen a paintbrush in years, the windows covered in grime, and the yard overgrown with weeds. It was the kind of place that made you wonder how anyone could live there, let alone a sick woman and a child. Are you sure you want me to go in with you? Jake asked softly, his voice filled with concern. The girl nodded slowly, her eyes darting nervously to the house. I don't want you to see her like this, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But I don't have anyone else to turn to. Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll take it. One step at a time, he said gently. You don't have to do this alone. The girl nodded again, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and relief. Together, they walked up to the front door, and the girl hesitated before reaching for the handle. She turned it slowly, the door creaking open with a soft groan. Inside, the house was dark, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner of the living room. The air smelled stale, and the floor creaked beneath their feet as they stepped inside. "Mom?" the girl called softly, her voice echoing through the empty house. There was no response. Jake felt a pang of unease in his chest. He had seen enough to know that something wasn't right here. "Maybe she's in the back," he suggested, his voice low. The girl nodded, her face pale with worry. Together, they walked through the dimly lit hallway towards the back of the house. As they passed the kitchen, Jake caught a glimpse of dirty dishes piled high in the sink, and the smell of rotting food wafted through the air. The place was in disarray, a clear sign that things had not been well for a long time. They reached the back bedroom, and the girl pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the room was dim, but Jake could make out the figure of a woman lying in bed, her frail form barely visible under a pile of blankets. "Mom?" the girl asked again, her voice trembling. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at the girl with a mixture of confusion and recognition. "Anna?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Is that really you?" The girl nodded, her eyes welling with tears. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I couldn't stay. I couldn't leave you alone, but I couldn't stay there anymore." The woman's face softened with understanding, and she reached out weakly towards her daughter. "I'm so sorry, Anna," she said, her voice full of regret. "I didn't want to make you leave. I never wanted you to feel like this." Anna stepped closer to the bed, her eyes filled with a mix of love and sorrow. "It's okay, Mom," she said softly. "I just want to make sure you're okay." Jake stood at the doorway, watching the scene unfold before him. He had seen many things in his life, but nothing quite like this. The love between a mother and child was undeniable, but so was the pain that came with it. The mother's illness had clearly taken a toll on them both, and Jake knew that they couldn't continue living like this. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear. He wasn't leaving Anna and her mother alone to face whatever came next. He had already decided. He was going to help them. As Anna sat down beside her mother, Jake turned to leave the room, giving them some privacy. He didn't know what the next steps would be, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let them face this alone. He had made a promise to Anna, and he intended to keep it. Outside, the night was still cold, but it no longer seemed as lonely. Jake took a deep breath, feeling a sense of purpose that he hadn't felt in a long time. He was going to do whatever it took to make sure Anna and her mother were safe. He wasn't just a biker anymore. He was something more, a protector, and he would stop at nothing to make sure they were okay. The following days were a blur for Jake, a whirlwind of uncertainty and quiet resolve. The moment he had stepped into that cramped bedroom, watching Anna and her mother embrace, something inside him shifted. He knew they needed more than just his presence. They needed a plan. The cold winter nights were unforgiving, but Jake was determined to give them some semblance of safety, a chance at something better than what they had been dealt. Jake had promised Anna that he wouldn't leave them alone, and that promise weighed heavily on him as he took action. He spent the next few days running errands, trying to get the information he needed. He didn't trust the situation they were in. Everything felt fragile, like it could fall apart at any moment. His mind raced with all the things he had to figure out. Anna's mother was too ill to get proper care at home, and Anna herself was just a child, too young to be carrying such a heavy burden. The place where they lived, that small, run-down house, was no longer safe. But what could he do? Jake wasn't a doctor. He wasn't a social worker. He was just a biker, a man who had spent most of his life riding through the chaos of his own existence. He hadn't had much time for anything else, especially not for fixing lives. But this time, he had no choice. He had to try. One night, after Anna had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room, Jake found himself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at his phone. He had made calls to a few people he knew, trying to get information about local shelters and hospitals. No one answered. It was late, and people had already gone home for the night. But then, a message came through from an old friend, someone Jake hadn't spoken to in years. It was from Marcus, a former member of his motorcycle club. "Hey, Reaper. I heard about the situation. I know a guy who can help. Call me when you get this." Jake felt a flicker of hope in his chest. Marcus wasn't the kind of guy to offer help without an agenda, but right now, Jake didn't care. He needed someone who could make things happen. He dialed Marcus' number, and the phone rang a few times before his old friend picked up. Yeah. Marcus' voice was rough, as if he had just woken up. It's Reaper, Jake said, keeping his tone even. I got a situation here, and I need some help. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I figured as much, Marcus said finally. You've got a kid in trouble, huh? Jake didn't respond, but he didn't need to. Marcus knew him too well. I can get you in touch with someone, Marcus continued. A friend of mine runs a clinic in the next town over. They'll take care of her and her mom. It's not much, but it's something. You just gotta get them there. Jake's heart pounded in his chest. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the first bit of hope he had gotten in days. Thank you, he said, his voice tight with gratitude. I'll make it happen. The next morning, Jake woke Anna up early. She had been sleeping on the couch, curled up in a blanket. She looked so small, so vulnerable. He didn't want to disturb her, but there was no time to waste. They had to leave. Anna, Jake said. Gently, his voice softer than usual. We're going to get your mom some help. She blinked, confused. What do you mean? I know a place, Jake said, trying to sound reassuring. It's not far. You'll be safe there. Anna's eyes widened, and for a moment, Jake saw something in her expression that made his stomach twist. It was fear. Fear that things might go wrong. Fear that this might all be some kind of trick. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes. Is she going to be okay? Anna asked softly, her voice shaking. Jake knelt down in front of her, placing a hand on her shoulder. I'm going to make sure she's okay, Jake said, his voice steady. But I need you to trust me. Anna nodded slowly, her face filled with a mixture of hope and worry. Okay, she said, almost too quietly. Jake helped her gather a few things, a small bag with a change of clothes for both of them, and then they went to find her mother. When they arrived at the bedroom, Anna's mother was still lying in bed, her breathing shallow. Jake's heart clenched as he looked at her. She looked so frail, so weak. But there was still a spark of life in her, a fight that hadn't been extinguished. He had to get her to that clinic. They didn't have much time. We're going to get you some help, Jake said softly to Anna's mother, trying to keep his voice calm despite the anxiety gnawing at him. She opened her eyes slowly, and when she saw him standing there, she gave him a weak smile. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jake nodded, lifting her carefully into his arms. It wasn't easy, but he managed to carry her out of the room, with Anna walking beside him, her eyes filled with both fear and trust. They had a long drive ahead of them, but Jake was determined. This was the right thing to do. He wasn't just a biker anymore. He was someone who cared, and that was something he hadn't felt in a long time. The drive to the clinic was long, and the silence in the car was deafening. Jake kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. The night had fallen heavier than before, and the headlights of his truck cast long shadows on the empty highway. Anna sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window. She hadn't said much since they left the house, and Jake could feel the weight of her silence. He could understand her fear. She was scared for her mother, scared for herself, and scared of what would happen next. But there was nothing more Jake could do except get them to the clinic as quickly as possible. He had made a promise to Anna, and he wasn't about to break it. In the back seat, Anna's mother was still unconscious, her frail body limp against the seat. Jake kept checking the rearview mirror, making sure she was still breathing. Her condition worried him. The last thing he wanted was to have her lose consciousness before they could get her the care she desperately needed. They were almost there when the rain started. It came down in sheets, slapping against the windshield like a relentless drumbeat. Jake cursed under his breath as he squinted through the rain, trying to keep his focus on the road. He had to get them to safety. We're almost there, Jake said softly, looking over at Anna. She nodded but didn't say anything. Her eyes were fixed on the windshield, but Jake could see the tension in her body. She was holding it together, but barely. As they neared the clinic, Jake could see the lights in the distance, faint through the storm. The building was small, tucked away behind a line of trees, and it looked out of place in the middle of nowhere. But right now, it was their only hope. When Jake pulled into the parking lot, he quickly parked the truck and turned off the engine. Anna, stay with your mom, Jake said as he got out of the truck. He didn't wait for her response, knowing she wouldn't argue. He was already making his way around to the back of the truck, where he carefully lifted Anna's mother from the seat. He had to be gentle. She was fragile. But as he moved her, he could feel the cold sweat on her skin, and it made his stomach tighten. She was getting worse. and he needed to hurry. He carried her inside the clinic as quickly as he could, the rain pouring down around him, soaking him to the bone. The clinic was small, but it was clean, and the warm lights inside were a welcome sight. A nurse, a tall woman in her 30s, was waiting at the door when Jake entered. She looked at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity as he approached her. "Is she okay?" the nurse asked, her voice filled with urgency. Jake nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "I think so. She's weak, but she needs immediate care. She's been sick for a while." The nurse didn't waste a moment. She led Jake down a narrow hallway to an exam room, where she helped him gently lay Anna's mother down on a bed. Anna followed closely behind, her eyes wide with worry. The nurse quickly began checking the woman's vitals, and Jake stepped back, giving her the space she needed to work. Anna stood beside him, her small hand clutching the edge of her jacket, her face pale with fear. Jake could see how hard it was for her to watch, and he placed a hand on her shoulder, offering what little comfort he could. "She's in good hands now," Jake said softly, trying to reassure her. Anna looked up at him, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "What if she doesn't make it?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Jake didn't know how to answer. The truth was, he wasn't sure what would happen, but he wasn't going to let her give up. "We're not giving up," Jake said firmly, his voice full of conviction. "We're going to make sure she gets the help she needs." As the nurse continued to work, Jake stepped outside to give them some privacy. The rain had slowed, but the chill in the air still cut through him. He lit a cigarette, staring out at the dark, empty parking lot. He wasn't a religious man, but he found himself hoping, praying even, that Anna's mother would pull through. He couldn't imagine what would happen if she didn't. He couldn't let Anna go through this alone. Inside the clinic, the nurse finished her examination and stepped outside. "She's stable for now," she said, her voice calm but serious. "But she's very sick. We'll need to run some tests and get her on in 4. It's going to be a long road." Jake nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a start. He turned back to Anna, who was standing in the hallway, waiting. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of everything she had been through. But there was something else there too. Hope. "She's going to be okay," Jake said, his voice more confident than he felt. Anna looked up at him, her face filled with uncertainty, but also a flicker of hope. "Really?" she asked softly. Jake nodded. Really. He couldn't promise her anything, but he would do whatever it took to make sure her mother had a fighting chance. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time in a long time, Jake felt like he was doing the right thing. He wasn't just a biker anymore. He was a protector, and he would fight for them, no matter what. Days passed, and Anna's mother, despite her condition, began to show signs of improvement. The clinic had taken good care of her, but Jake couldn't help but feel the weight of their situation pressing down on him. Every day, he visited the clinic, checking in on her, ensuring that Anna had everything she needed. He knew the battle wasn't over yet, and that the road to recovery would be long and hard, but at least they had a fighting chance now. Anna, for the first time in a long while, was starting to smile again. She had found a little hope, a flicker of warmth in the cold reality that had defined her life. It was a small victory, but for Jake, it meant everything. One evening, after his visit to the clinic, Jake stood outside, his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, staring out at the horizon. The cold air nipped at his face, but the wind didn't feel as harsh anymore. Maybe it was because the weight of the world wasn't resting solely on his shoulders anymore. Maybe it was because Anna and her mother had found something he hadn't realized they were looking for, hope. But as the night grew darker and the city settled into quiet, a familiar unease started creeping up his spine. It was the kind of feeling he had learned to recognize over the years. Something wasn't right. He had been trying to ignore the gnawing sensation, trying to believe that everything was going to be okay, but he couldn't shake the feeling that danger was still lurking just around the corner. Anna's mother, while improving, was still frail. Her health had been deteriorating for too long, and Jake knew that this wouldn't be a quick fix. But what bothered him the most was that there was more to their story. He couldn't help but wonder why Anna's mother had been so adamant about not going to the hospital, why she had kept them isolated for so long. There was something she wasn't telling him, something she was keeping hidden, and Jake was determined to find out what it was. The next morning, Jake woke up early, his mind already racing. He needed to do some digging, needed to understand exactly what had been happening before he had come into their lives. He wasn't sure how he was going to get the answers, but he wasn't going to stop until he had them. He had to. He knew that Anna and her mother had been through too much to have secrets holding them back. As he made his way to the clinic, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Marcus. "I found something," it read. "Meet me tonight at the old warehouse. 8 p.m. Jake's stomach turned. He knew what Marcus meant. Marcus wasn't the type to offer help without expecting something in return. But Jake didn't have time to hesitate. He had to find the truth. That night, Jake drove to the old warehouse, the familiar sound of his Harley echoing in the still night air. The place was abandoned, long forgotten by most of the city, and the dim lights flickered ominously. When he arrived, Marcus was already waiting. "I found out about Anna's mom," Marcus said without preamble, his voice low and serious. Jake's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice tight. Marcus paused for a moment, then handed Jake a file. "This is what you need to know. Anna's mom isn't just sick. She's hiding something. Something big." Jake opened the file, his eyes scanning the contents quickly. It didn't take long for him to realize what Marcus meant. The woman wasn't just ill. She was being hunted. Someone had been after her for months, and Jake had unknowingly stepped into the middle of it. His stomach sank as he read through the documents, piecing together the story of a dangerous past that Anna's mother had tried to escape. The name of a man appeared again and again in the files, someone who had been tracking her, someone who had made her life a nightmare. Jake looked up from the file, his eyes locking with Marcus. "Who is he?" Jake demanded. Marcus hesitated for a moment. "He's connected to some powerful people," he said finally. "But he's not just a businessman. He's dangerous, Reaper. And he's coming for her." Jake's mind raced. Anna and her mother weren't just victims of circumstance. They were running from something far bigger than they had let on. He felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him harder than ever. "We need to get them out of here," Jake said, his voice grim. Marcus nodded, his expression dark. "I'll make the arrangements. You just keep them safe." Jake didn't need to be told twice. He couldn't let Anna or her mother go through any more. The stakes had just been raised. There was no turning back now. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it, no matter the cost. As Jake left the warehouse and made his way back to the clinic, the rain started to fall again, the steady rhythm of it on the pavement a reminder of the danger that was closing in on them. But Jake wasn't afraid. He had fought battles before, and this time, he wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for Anna. He was fighting for her mother, and he wasn't going to lose. Jake's mind was racing as he sped back to the clinic, the rain now coming down in torrents, the windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the relentless storm. He was no stranger to danger, but this was different. This wasn't just about a fight or a road trip gone wrong. This was about protecting someone who couldn't protect herself, and protecting Anna. He had no idea how deep this web went, but what he did know was that they weren't safe anymore. The moment he had learned who was after them, the weight of the responsibility had doubled. His focus sharpened. He had to think on his feet, act fast. They didn't have the luxury of time. When he arrived at the clinic, the familiar lights and warmth that had comforted him before felt like a distant memory. His senses were heightened now, aware of every shadow and sound. He quickly parked his Harley and ran inside, his boots thudding against the linoleum floors. Inside, Anna was sitting by her mother's bed, looking more composed than she had the night before, but still filled with worry. When she saw Jake, her face brightened just a little, but her eyes still held that edge of fear. "How is she?" Jake asked as he walked up to her. Anna shrugged, her face etched with exhaustion. "The nurse says she's stable, but I don't know. She's not the same, Jake. She's so quiet." Jake's heart clenched as he placed a hand on Anna's shoulder. "She's been through a lot, kid. We all have." Anna gave him a small nod, but didn't say anything. Jake turned to look at Anna's mother, who was resting in the bed, her thin form barely visible beneath the blankets. She looked pale, even more fragile than the day before. He could feel the urgency rising in him, the need to get them both out of here. But he couldn't leave without a plan, and right now, he didn't have one. He paced back and forth, trying to think of his next move. He needed to keep them safe, and he needed to do it now. There was no time to waste. Then it hit him. The warehouse. Marcus had said he would make the arrangements, but Jake knew he couldn't rely on anyone else. If he was going to protect Anna and her mother, he had to take control of the situation. Without a second thought, he turned to Anna. "Listen to me," Jake said, his voice low but firm. We need to get your mom out of here. We can't stay here any longer. It's not safe. Anna's eyes widened with fear, but she didn't argue. But where will we go? She asked, her voice trembling. Jake looked at her, his expression softening. I know a place. It's far from here, but you'll be safe there. You and your mom. Anna nodded, though Jake could see the doubt in her eyes. She wasn't sure what to believe anymore. She had lived in uncertainty for so long. Jake crouched down beside her and took her hand. We'll be okay, I promise. I won't let anyone hurt you. She squeezed his hand back, her small fingers trembling slightly. Jake stood up, turning his attention to Anna's mother. He knew the situation wasn't ideal, but they couldn't stay here. The moment Marcus had mentioned the dangerous man coming for them, Jake knew he had to act fast. We need to get your mom up, Jake said. Can you help me? Anna nodded, her face determined. She stood and walked over to the bed, gently brushing her mother's hair away from her face. Mom, she said softly, we're going to take you somewhere safe. Please, wake up. Anna's mother stirred, her eyes fluttering open, but they were cloudy, distant. Where are we going? She whispered weakly. We need to get you to a safer place, Mom, Anna said gently. Jake's going to help us. The woman's gaze shifted to Jake, and for a moment, there was recognition in her eyes, but it quickly faded as the fog of illness returned. Thank you, she whispered. Jake bent down, carefully lifting her into his arms. She was light as a feather, too weak to resist. He could feel the weight of her frailty, the sense of urgency building as he carried her out of the room. Anna followed closely behind, her face full of concern, but Jake could see the spark of trust in her eyes. They made their way to the back door of the clinic, the rain now a steady downpour, soaking them as they stepped outside. The cold was biting, but Jake's mind was focused on the task at hand. He opened the back of the truck and gently placed Anna's mother inside. Anna climbed in after her, and Jake slammed the door shut, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. Stay low, Jake said, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. We're going to get you both to safety. As he started the truck, his hands tight on the steering wheel, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He glanced in the rearview mirror, scanning the empty streets behind them, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. He pushed the thoughts aside. They were already in motion, and they had no time to lose. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt Anna or her mother, not while he was still breathing. The night was dark, the storm still raging, but Jake felt a flicker of something inside him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. He wasn't just riding for the thrill anymore. He was riding to protect them, to keep them safe, and he wasn't going to stop until he had done just that. The drive felt longer than it should have, the rain still pouring down in relentless sheets. Jake's eyes never strayed from the road as he gripped the wheel tightly, but his mind was elsewhere, racing with thoughts of what had happened and what was still to come. He had made a promise to Anna, and he wasn't going to break it, not now. He had already faced too much in his life, and now, with her and her mother in the back of the truck, he was more determined than ever to see this through. They had to get away. They had to get out of here before the people who were after them caught up with them. Anna's mother, still unconscious, rested in the back of the truck, her breathing shallow but steady. Anna sat beside her, her small hand gently brushing her mother's hair back from her forehead. She hadn't spoken much since they left the clinic, but Jake could feel her fear radiating off her. He could feel the weight of it too, the burden of knowing he wasn't just protecting them from a sickness or a dangerous man. He was protecting them from a lifetime of fear, from a life that had never been kind. The truck's headlights cut through the dark, the road ahead illuminated by the yellow glow of the bulbs, but the path felt uncertain, full of shadows that seemed to follow them no matter how fast they drove. It felt like they were being hunted, like every mile brought them closer to something they couldn't escape. Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel as the truck barreled down the highway. His heart was pounding in his chest. His mind was still going a mile a minute, replaying everything he had learned in the past few days. Marcus' warning echoed in his head, and the file he had received made his blood run cold. Anna's mother wasn't just sick. She was being targeted. Someone with power, wanted her, and if Jake didn't act fast, they would get her. Anna's voice broke through his thoughts, small and fragile. Jake, she said, her voice trembling. Where are we going? Jake glanced over at her, seeing the fear in her eyes, the fear of the unknown, the fear of not knowing where they were going or what was waiting for them. He took a deep breath and spoke as calmly as he could. "We're going to a safe place, Anna," he said, trying to reassure her. "We're going to be okay." She didn't look convinced, but she didn't press. She simply nodded and went back to sitting beside her mother, her hand still resting on her, a quiet show of love and loyalty. Jake drove in silence for a while longer, the rain still pouring, the wind howling against the sides of the truck. It felt like time was stretching on forever, each moment adding to the weight on his shoulders. He knew he had to do more than just protect them. He had to figure out what was going on, why Anna's mother had been running for so long, why they were in so much danger. But most of all, he had to keep them safe. That was his job now. He had made that promise, and he wasn't about to break it. After what felt like an eternity, Jake spotted a sign up ahead. The town was just a few miles away. He had reached his destination, but it wasn't the end of the road. Not by a long shot. He had to keep moving, keep them safe, keep them out of sight. He turned off the main highway and took a series of back roads, places less traveled, less likely to draw attention. They drove for hours, until the truck was starting to sputter with the low fuel. Jake didn't mind. He needed the time to think, to figure out the next step. They finally reached a small cabin tucked away on a piece of land far from the nearest town. It was secluded, quiet, and, most importantly, it was hidden. Jake stopped the truck and looked at Anna. "This is it," he said, his voice firm. "We're safe here for now." Anna looked out at the cabin, her eyes wide. "Is this where we're going to stay?" she asked, still uncertain. Jake nodded, getting out of the truck. He went around to the back and carefully helped Anna's mother out, making sure she was comfortable as he gently supported her. Anna followed, still looking at the cabin with a mixture of curiosity and concern. They walked into the cabin, where the warmth immediately hit them, a stark contrast to the chill of the night. The cabin was modest but had everything they needed: a small wood stove in the corner, a few chairs, and a bed in the corner where Anna's mother could rest. Jake made sure everything was set up, ensuring they had food and water. He looked over at Anna, who was sitting on a chair, still holding onto her mother's hand. She looked up at him, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "Thank you, Jake," she said softly. Jake smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's not over yet, Anna," he replied. "We have to stay vigilant. We're not safe yet." Anna nodded, her expression somber. She understood. Jake knew that the fight wasn't over, and this cabin was just the beginning of the journey. He had to keep them safe, keep them hidden, and protect them from whatever or whoever was coming after them. It was going to be a long road, but he wasn't going to let anything happen to them. Not on his watch. The next few days at the cabin were peaceful, but Jake couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered over him like a storm cloud. The cabin was secluded, hidden from prying eyes, and it had all the basic necessities to keep Anna and her mother comfortable. It wasn't much, but it was a safe haven for now. Jake spent most of his time outside, checking the area around the cabin, making sure no one was following them. The feeling of being watched never went away. It was the same feeling he had back when he was deep in the Hells Angels, when trouble was never far behind. But this was different. There were no rivals out there, no bikers looking to settle scores. This was something more personal, something far more dangerous. Anna's mother was still weak, but she was slowly getting better. The doctor had told Jake that it would take time for her to fully recover, but at least now she had a fighting chance. Anna, on the other hand, was slowly coming to terms with everything. She wasn't as scared as she had been before, but the tension was still there, a quiet undercurrent of fear that Jake could sense every time he looked at her. It was that look of uncertainty, the same one that had been in her eyes when they first met. It was a look that told Jake that, despite the small victories they had achieved, the real battle had only just begun. As the days passed, Jake kept a close eye on the weather. Winter was settling in, and with it, the harsh winds and the cold that made the nights unbearable. But even more pressing was the fact that Jake knew they couldn't stay here forever. The cabin was a temporary solution, a place to hide for now, but the world outside was closing in. Jake had no idea how long it would be before the man who had been hunting Anna's mother found them. But he knew one thing for sure. They couldn't stay in hiding forever. It was a quiet morning when the knock on the door came. Jake was already outside, checking the perimeter as usual. His instincts were sharp, honed from years of living in a world where danger was always close. But this time, it was different. He felt a chill run down his spine as he heard the knock. It wasn't the sound of an intruder trying to break in. It was too polite, too careful. It wasn't a sound that made him reach for his weapon immediately. It was a sound that made him hesitate. Anna was inside with her mother, and Jake had no idea who it could be. He made his way to the cabin door, his hand hovering over the handle. He had to be cautious. He opened it slowly, peeking out just enough to see who was standing there. A man, about Jake's age, wearing a dark jacket and jeans. His face was familiar, but Jake couldn't place him. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of smile that made Jake's instincts scream. "Looking for someone?" Jake asked, his voice low and cautious. "Just looking to talk," the man replied. "You're in the wrong place," Jake said firmly, stepping outside and closing the door behind him. He didn't want to draw Anna into this just yet. "I don't think you understand," the man said, his voice growing colder. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Jake's gaze sharpened. He knew the tone, the confidence. This wasn't just some random guy. This was someone who had a reason for being here. Someone dangerous. "I'm just trying to protect my family," Jake said, his voice firm now, the weight of the words carrying the truth. The man's eyes narrowed. "You think you're protecting them? You're just delaying the inevitable. The moment you brought them here, you sealed their fate." Jake's heart skipped a beat. He didn't say anything, but inside, the dread settled deeper. He knew this man had something to do with the danger Anna's mother had been running from. "You don't know what you're dealing with," the man continued, his tone dripping with menace. "You can't keep running forever. They'll come for them, no matter where you hide." Jake's mind was racing now. He needed to protect Anna, protect her mother. The man wasn't just a threat. He was a warning. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to let Jake know that the time to run was over. "I'll take my chances," Jake said, his voice steady, though every nerve in his body was on high alert. "You're making a mistake," the man said, his voice low and threatening. "I'm giving you a chance. Leave now, and I'll make sure they're left alone. Stay, and I'll make sure you regret it." Jake took a deep breath, trying to process what he was hearing. He wasn't about to back down. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "You don't scare me," Jake said, his jaw clenched. The man's smile widened, a dark laugh escaping his lips. "We'll see about that," he said. With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the woods surrounding the cabin. Jake stood there for a long moment, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't trust the man, didn't believe for a second that he would just leave them alone. But what choice did he have? He turned and went back inside the cabin, his mind racing. Anna was standing by the window, her eyes wide with concern. "Who was that?" she asked. "Just a visitor," Jake said, his voice calm, but his mind still on edge. "But it looks like our time here is up." Anna's face fell, and Jake could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. He had to act fast, and he had to protect them. There was no time to waste. He wasn't about to let anyone take Anna or her mother. Not now. Not ever. Jake knew that their time in the cabin had come to an end. The man's warning, the one who had come to the door earlier, weighed heavily on his mind. His words were a threat, not just to him, but to Anna and her mother. There was no more hiding now. No more waiting for the danger to come to them. Jake had always known that the past would catch up with them one day, but now it was too close. Too real. He didn't know exactly who was behind this, but it didn't matter. What mattered now was protecting Anna and her mother. He couldn't afford to wait for the next move to be made against them. As he stood in the doorway, looking out into the forest surrounding the cabin, Jake felt the heavy weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Anna was counting on him, and so was her mother. He couldn't fail them. He turned back to look at Anna, who was sitting by the small table in the corner of the cabin, her eyes watching him closely. Her face was pale, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She had been through so much, and now this. Jake didn't want to add to her fear, but there was no choice. "We can't stay here anymore," Jake said, his voice firm. Anna's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Where will we go?" Jake could see the panic starting to rise in her eyes. She was scared. She was always scared. "I'll get us out of here," Jake said, walking over to her and sitting down beside her. He took her hands in his, trying to steady her. "We'll be okay. We have to keep moving, that's all." Anna's brow furrowed, her gaze fixed on the floor. "But what about Mom?" she whispered. Jake's heart clenched at the mention of Anna's mother. He looked over at her, lying quietly on the bed, her face pale and drawn. She had been getting better, but her condition was still fragile. She needed constant care. "I'll take care of her," Jake said quietly. "But we need to leave before anyone else shows up. We can't wait around for them to find us." Anna looked at him for a long moment, and then, finally, nodded. "Okay," she said, her voice small, almost uncertain. "I trust you." Jake gave her a tight smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He was doing everything he could, but the truth was, he wasn't sure if he could protect them forever. They needed help, and they needed it fast. He stood up, turning towards the door. "I'll pack the truck. We need to move fast." The sound of his boots on the wooden floor echoed in the quiet cabin as he made his way outside. The rain had stopped, but the air was still thick with tension, the weight of impending danger hanging in the air. Jake quickly packed the truck with the essentials: food, water, clothes, and anything else they might need. His mind raced as he worked, trying to think of the best course of action. He couldn't stay here any longer. But where could they go? The road ahead was uncertain, and every decision felt like a step into the unknown. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone take Anna and her mother. As he finished loading the truck, Jake paused for a moment, looking back at the cabin. It had been their shelter, their safe place, but it wasn't safe anymore. The danger was real, and it was closing in. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what came next. When he went back inside, Anna was standing by her mother's side, her hand on her shoulder. She looked up at Jake, her eyes filled with determination, though the fear still lingered in her gaze. "We're ready," she said softly. Jake nodded. "Let's go." They didn't have much time. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows across the cabin, and Jake knew the darkness would only make things more dangerous. As they climbed into the truck, Jake's mind raced. He couldn't stay ahead of this forever, but right now, he had to keep them safe. The engine roared to life, and Jake pulled away from the cabin, taking one last look at the place they had called home for the past few days. The road ahead was empty, the world outside quiet, but Jake knew better. He wasn't just running from something. He was running to something. He was running to keep Anna and her mother safe. As they drove, the miles stretched out before them, an endless road that led to uncertainty. Jake didn't know what was waiting at the end of the road, but he would fight for them. He would protect them, whatever it took. The truck hummed steadily along the winding road as Jake kept his eyes on the rearview mirror. The storm from earlier had passed, but the tension in the air remained, thick and unrelenting. He hadn't said much since they left the cabin. The silence between him and Anna was heavy, filled with the weight of the unspoken fears that lingered between them. His mind raced with thoughts of the man who had come to the door, the one who had warned them. He wasn't going to let up. Jake knew they were being hunted. It wasn't just about staying ahead of whoever was after them. It was about surviving long enough to get Anna and her mother to safety. The question of where to go kept gnawing at him. They couldn't stay on the move forever, and with Anna's mother still weak, Jake had to find a place they could stay for a while. But no matter how hard he thought, he kept hitting dead ends. There were no safe havens, no guarantees. As the truck sped through the dark, the headlights illuminating nothing but the long stretch of highway ahead, Jake's thoughts kept circling back to one thing. How long could they outrun danger? Anna finally broke the silence, her voice soft but firm. "Jake, where are we going?" He glanced over at her. She was sitting in the passenger seat, her eyes locked on the road ahead. "I told you," Jake said quietly, keeping his tone calm. "We're going somewhere safe." Anna didn't say anything more, but Jake could see the uncertainty in her face. She wasn't sure if she believed him anymore. He couldn't blame her. He wasn't sure he believed it either. The road stretched out endlessly, and Jake could feel the weight of the miles pressing down on him. His mind flickered back to the warehouse, where Marcus had told him they weren't just running from the past. They were running from something bigger. Whoever was chasing Anna's mother had power, and they weren't going to stop until they got what they wanted. Jake's thoughts were interrupted as the truck suddenly jerked. His heart skipped a beat as he quickly grabbed the wheel. "What the hell?" he muttered, under his breath. He looked out the window and saw the truck's tire was flat. He slowed the truck down and pulled over to the side of the road. "Just great," he groaned. He put the truck in park and climbed out, heading to the back to assess the damage. Anna watched him silently, her face tight with concern. Jake popped the truck's trunk open and rummaged through the supplies he had packed. Of course, he had a spare tire. But in his current state of mind, it felt like one more setback, One more thing to add to the pile of things that were slipping out of his control. He pulled out the tire iron, crouched down to start changing the flat, but then froze. His senses kicked into overdrive as he heard the sound of tires crunching against gravel in the distance. He straightened up, his eyes scanning the road. There was no mistaking it. Someone was coming. The truck had barely started to move again when Jake felt it, the unmistakable sense that they were being watched. He glanced in the rearview mirror, but saw nothing. A couple of miles passed, and Jake's hands tightened on the wheel, his grip white-knuckled. Then, up ahead, he saw it, headlights flashing in the distance. He could make out the outline of a vehicle speeding toward them, fast. They had company. Jake's heart raced. He wasn't sure if it was the people chasing them or just another stranger, but he wasn't going to take any chances. He hit the gas, trying to get the truck moving faster. He glanced over at Anna, who had noticed the approaching vehicle now. "Stay down," he told her firmly. "Whatever happens, don't get up. Don't make a sound." Anna nodded, her face pale but resolute. Jake watched in the mirror as the headlights grew larger, drawing closer. The truck's engine roared louder as he pushed it harder, praying that the truck would hold up. He could feel his pulse thumping in his ears, his breath shallow. They couldn't outrun this vehicle forever. He needed to find a way to lose them. Suddenly, the truck veered off to the side of the road. It was a man, with a face Jake didn't recognize. The man's truck had pulled up alongside them, the engine revving in challenge. Jake's instincts screamed at him to get away, but it was too late. The man pulled up beside them, matching their speed. Jake's hand hovered over the gun he kept in the truck. His mind was racing. He could handle a lot of things, he had done it before, but this situation was different. Anna's safety was on the line. Without warning, the man's truck swerved in front of them, cutting them off. Jake slammed on the brakes to avoid crashing into the vehicle, the truck skidding and slipping on the wet road. "Get ready," Jake muttered, preparing for whatever was about to come. The man's truck came to a stop in front of them, blocking the road. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as the door of the truck opened. The man stepped out slowly, walking toward them with deliberate, measured steps. Jake watched him carefully. He didn't know who this was, but it didn't matter. He wasn't going to let anyone hurt Anna or her mother. Not now. Not ever. The man reached the truck and knocked on the window, signaling Jake to roll it down. Jake's eyes narrowed. He wasn't sure if it was a threat or a plea for help. Either way, he wasn't taking chances. He slowly rolled the window down, just enough to hear him. "What do you want?" Jake asked, his voice steady, but the tension in his chest was unbearable. The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "I think you know exactly why I'm here." Jake's grip tightened on the steering wheel, his knuckles white as the man in front of the truck slowly approached. The headlights illuminated his face, a hard, calculating look that made Jake's blood run cold. The air around them felt charged, like the calm before a storm, and every muscle in Jake's body was coiled tight. He had no idea who this man was, but the words from earlier kept echoing in his mind. "You don't know who I am, do you?" It didn't matter anymore. Whoever he was, Jake wasn't going to let him threaten Anna or her mother. The man stopped just short of the truck, his eyes locking onto Jake's. His smile was gone, replaced by a cold, unblinking stare. Jake didn't speak right away. He didn't need to. His presence, the firm set of his jaw, told the man everything he needed to know. Finally, the man spoke, his voice low and slow, almost taunting. "I warned you," he said, "but you're too stubborn to listen. Now, you're in the way." Jake's pulse quickened, but his expression didn't change. "I don't know who you are or who you think you are, but you're not taking them," Jake said, his voice calm but firm. "You're going to leave. Now." The man took a step closer, his hands in his pockets, and Jake's hand instinctively moved closer to the weapon under his jacket. He knew he didn't want to use it, but if it came to that, he would. The man chuckled, as if Jake's words were a joke. "You really think you can stop this? You've got no idea who you're dealing with. This isn't just some street fight, biker. You're way out of your league." Jake's jaw clenched, and for a moment, he was silent. The man's arrogance was infuriating, but Jake wasn't about to let him intimidate him. "I don't care who you are," Jake said, his voice quieter but no less threatening. "You touch them, and you'll have me to deal with." The man's smile faded, his eyes narrowing. "So be it," he said, almost as if he were expecting Jake to react. In a blur of movement, the man reached into his coat, pulling out a gun. It wasn't aimed at Jake, but he knew better than to think this man wasn't prepared to use it. The air between them grew thick with tension, and Jake could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to act. But then, just as quickly as the man had pulled the gun, something changed. The man froze, his eyes darting to the side. Jake, instinctively, shifted his gaze as well. From the corner of the road, headlights cut through the darkness. Another vehicle, a black SUV, appeared from the shadows, screeching to a halt beside them. The man in front of the truck stiffened, his eyes scanning the SUV as the door opened. Jake's hand never left the gun, but he could feel the shift in the situation. He didn't know who the new arrival was, but something told him they weren't on his side. A woman stepped out of the SUV. She was tall, with sharp features and an icy demeanor that matched the cold wind swirling around them. Her eyes, however, were what caught Jake's attention. They were calculating, assessing the situation in a way that made him wary. The man in front of Jake's truck looked at her for a long moment before nodding, as if signaling something. "You're outnumbered, Reaper," the man said, turning back to Jake with a smirk. Jake's mind raced. He had thought this was going to be a one-on-one confrontation, but now it was clear that this was bigger than just the man who had been hunting them. This was something deeper, something more dangerous. The woman walked toward them, her footsteps sure and deliberate. "He's right," she said, her voice calm but cold. "You should have left when you had the chance." Jake's grip tightened on the wheel, but he didn't flinch. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice firm. "Neither are they." The woman studied him for a moment, then glanced back at the man. There was a quiet exchange between them, too subtle for Jake to catch, but he could feel the shift in the air. The woman's gaze returned to him. "You're making this harder on yourself," she said, her tone almost pitying. "There's a lot more at play here than you understand." Jake took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. "I understand enough," Jake said, his voice unwavering. "I know you're not walking away from this." The woman's eyes narrowed, a hint of annoyance flashing across her face. "You'll regret this," she warned, her voice colder now. "But fine, if you want to make it difficult, so be it." She turned to the man, giving a sharp nod. The man grinned, as if Jake had just played into their hands. But before anything could escalate, there was a loud screeching sound from behind them. Another set of headlights, this time a familiar engine roar, cut through the night air. Jake's heart skipped a beat as he saw the approaching figure. Marcus, the old friend who had sent him the message. The black motorcycle skidded to a stop beside the truck, and Marcus stepped off, his face grim but resolute. "Looks like you're in the way too," Marcus said to the woman, his voice carrying the weight of years of loyalty. The woman froze, her expression shifting for just a moment. Jake saw the hesitation in her eyes, a crack. In the certainty, Marcus didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped forward, standing beside Jake, the unspoken alliance clear. "You don't have to do this," Marcus said. "Just walk away." The woman's eyes flickered between them. The man beside her looked uncomfortable, but the woman didn't budge. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before she finally spoke. "This isn't over," she said, her voice cold as ice. "But for tonight, you've won." Without another word, she turned and got back into the SUV, signaling the man to follow. The engine roared to life, and within moments, the two of them disappeared into the darkness, leaving Jake and Marcus standing in the cold night air. Jake exhaled slowly, his shoulders dropping as the tension released. He turned to Marcus. "I owe you one." Marcus grinned, the familiar twinkle in his eyes. "Just keeping my promise," he said. Jake looked over at Anna and her mother in the truck, his heart swelling with relief. They were safe. For now. And he wasn't going to stop until they stayed that way.